Dripping water echoed through the bathroom on the 22nd floor. A cold body lay curled in the tub. Her eyes were wide open but lifeless. A bruise on her wrist stood out sharply, as if someone had yanked her arm just moments earlier. Outside, faint music from the New Year's Eve party still played. Someone knocked on the door, but Christine didn't answer anymore. What really happened inside room 2209 of the City Garden Grand Hotel on the 31st of December, 2020? One girl, 11 men, and a death no one could explain. Part 1, the last countdown. It began with the sound of running water. A hotel bathtub, still half filled, steam lingering faintly in the air. Her body curled to one side, hair soaked, skin cold. The position of her arms suggested a quiet collapse, not a fall. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes vacant. In the early hours of the 1st of January, 2021, inside room 2209 of the City Garden Grand Hotel in Makati, a young woman named Christine Angelica Dacera was found lifeless. She was 23 years old. Her lips bore a subtle purplish hue, and bruises were visible along her thighs and knees. A towel, slightly damp, lay folded on the floor nearby. Her phone sat on the bathroom counter, its screen black. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture. One of the men who shared the room that night claimed he discovered her in the bathtub sometime around 10 in the morning. He thought she was asleep. He draped a blanket over her and returned to bed. Hours passed before anyone checked again. By the time help was called, Christine was no longer breathing. Christine Dacera had arrived at the hotel the evening before. It was New Year's Eve. Fireworks echoed across Metro Manila. She checked in with a small group of acquaintances, most of whom she knew from the airline industry. Others arrived later. 11 men, including Christine, were inside the two adjacent hotel rooms, 2,209 and 2,207. She was the only woman among them. The event was meant to be a private celebration. Drinks were served, laughter was heard. Witnesses later described the atmosphere as carefree, even euphoric. But by sunrise, that hotel suite had become a crime scene. A young woman's life had ended under circumstances that were at best unclear, at worst criminal. For investigators, what began as a suspected case of intoxication-related death quickly escalated into something more complicated. There were physical injuries, there were reports of sexual activity, there was biological evidence, and there were inconsistencies in the statements of those involved. Police initially classified the case as rape with homicide. 3 suspects were detained. 8 more were placed under surveillance. The theory was simple. A young woman was outnumbered and overpowered during a New Year's party. She may have been assaulted while unconscious. The pressure, both social and physiological, may have triggered a fatal event, an aortic rupture. But the case did not hold. As investigators pressed further, things began to fall apart. Forensic reports contradicted early statements. Surveillance footage revealed Christine's interactions throughout the night. Her demeanor was relaxed. She was seen walking between rooms, drinking, laughing. At one point, she called her mother and said she was having a great time. The men accused of harming her all identified as homosexual. They insisted they were incapable of the crime. They claimed Christine was a trusted friend, someone they would never hurt. And for a time, the evidence began to lean in their favor. Still, questions remained. Why were there bruises on her inner thighs? Why was she left in a bathtub unattended for hours? Why didn't anyone call for help sooner? And if it wasn't assault, what was it? From the hallway, security cameras captured the moment Christine was helped back to her room. Her legs were unsteady, her body appeared limp. A friend carried her in his arms. Later, he would tell investigators he placed her on the bathtub floor, believing she would rest there more comfortably. But something went wrong. From a behavioral standpoint, the actions that followed are critical. The delay in seeking medical help, the lack of immediate alarm, the assumption that she was simply asleep. These are common in group dynamics, where responsibility is diffused. No one takes action, believing someone else will. Inside the room, no one appeared to panic. No one called an ambulance until it was too late. The last known photograph of Christine was taken just hours before her death. She sat on the edge of a toilet seat, smiling faintly, raising her fingers in a peace sign. Her pupils were dilated. Her expression was glassy. It may have been the last moment she was fully conscious. Whatever happened next is a matter of speculation, but experts have studied the case with one question in mind. Was it a tragic accident? A misjudged celebration taken too far? Or was Christine Dacera the victim of something far more deliberate? The answer may lie not in what was said, but in what was carefully left out. And the silence that followed her final breath continues to raise suspicion. In the hours that followed, authorities would begin collecting statements, forensic samples, and hotel footage. But for one man, whose shirt had a faint stain along the cuff and whose behavior on camera had been described as overly calm, a closer look was about to begin. Because something about his story did not match the timeline. The investigation was far from over. And in the next chapter, a party that was meant to celebrate life would begin to unravel into a circle of deceit. Part 2, a party to die. For the evening of the 31st of December, 2020, began with the sound of glasses clinking and music echoing faintly through the hallway of the 22nd floor. Room 2209 of the City Garden Grand Hotel in Makati had been reserved under the name of Romeo Galido. He was a colleague of Christine Dacera, working in the same airline company, and was one of the few people she had personally invited to join her for New Year's Eve. The room was spacious, with neutral lighting and modern decor. Early in the evening, only 4 people were present: Christine and 3 male acquaintances. At approximately 10 p.m., additional guests began arriving. Some came from the adjacent room, 2207. By midnight, there were at least 12 people involved in the gathering. Christine remained the only female present. Several of the guests had known each other previously, mostly through the airline industry and mutual social circles. The connections varied in closeness. Christine had a well-documented presence on social media and was described as outgoing, confident, and approachable. Some of the guests were considered friends, others acquaintances. At least one man in the room had only met her that night. Statements collected later revealed inconsistent accounts regarding who initiated the extended guest list. One attendee claimed he was invited by another who wasn't listed on the original reservation. Another described the party as spontaneous, informal, and fluid. Alcohol was freely available, including hard liquor. Some mentioned champagne, vodka, and rum. There were also mentions of mixed drinks being shared between rooms. According to multiple statements, Christine moved frequently between room 2209 and 2207 throughout the night. Surveillance footage from the hallway supported this. She appeared relaxed, sometimes playful, and at one point was seen laughing while holding a glass and talking closely to 2 men by the doorframe. There were no recorded signs of distress or confrontation during this period. At around 2 a.m., several guests reported that Christine had become noticeably intoxicated. She was assisted back to room 2209 by 2 individuals. One of them, later identified as John Pascual de la Serna, stated that he helped her lie down on the bed so she could rest. Others claimed she alternated between being alert and disoriented. Her phone activity continued intermittently until approximately 3:30 a.m., according to data recovered from her device. An image surfaced later, taken by one of the attendees in the bathroom of room 2209. It showed Christine seated near the toilet, gesturing playfully at the camera. The timestamp placed the photo at 3:42 a.m. Though she appeared visibly intoxicated, her facial expression was still responsive. Less than 3 hours later, she was declared dead. Within that critical time frame, several factors became pivotal to investigators. First, there was uncertainty about who was in the room during the final 2 hours. Not all attendees were accounted for consistently in statements. Second, minor injuries were reported on Christine's body, including contusions on her legs and arms. While none appeared fatal, the presence of physical marks contradicted early theories of a peaceful, alcohol-induced collapse. One detail, in particular, raised concern. When the forensic team reviewed the condition of Christine's body, they documented superficial abrasions on her inner thigh and discoloration on her left wrist. These marks were later interpreted by some forensic experts as possible signs of restraint or mishandling, though others argued they could have resulted from blunt contact during intoxication. Adding to the complexity, several of the men present that night voluntarily disclosed their sexual orientation during questioning, most identified as homosexual. Their statements, collected individually, aligned on this point and were largely consistent in tone and detail. However, the reliability of these declarations was debated within the investigative team. Without conclusive DNA comparisons or direct eyewitness reports of wrongdoing, the orientation of the individuals could neither confirm nor eliminate the possibility of coercion. Toxicology reports conducted on Christine's body confirmed the presence of ethanol in her system, but revealed no traces of narcotics or sedatives. This finding appeared to rule out drug-facilitated assault, at least from a pharmacological standpoint. Yet the unexplained bruising, combined with the lack of a timely emergency response, continued to create suspicion. Another point of interest was the state of Christine's clothing. According to the initial report from the hotel staff, her undergarments were found slightly disarranged. This observation, though not definitive proof of assault, became a contentious element during public discussion and media coverage. Investigators debated whether the condition of her clothing was consistent with attempted resuscitation, careless movement during intoxication, or something more intentional. The arrangement of the rooms also drew attention. Room 2209 was directly connected to 2207 by a short hallway. Guests moved freely between the two spaces during the night. While this openness explained the mingling observed on CCTV, it also made it more difficult to establish who was present during Christine's final conscious moments. As the timeline narrowed between her last known interaction and the discovery of her unresponsive body, investigators began constructing a chart of movements. Phone logs, swipe card data, and digital timestamps from photos and CCTV were aligned. The results suggested a period of approximately 90 minutes, during which Christine was left largely unattended in the bathroom. The individuals closest to her during this window gave varying accounts of what they believed she was doing. None of the statements mentioned observing Christine in any visible medical distress. The first definitive manhunt action came when trace DNA was found in her system. Initial reports suggested the presence of semen, prompting immediate arrest warrants for 3 men. However, later examination raised concerns about cross-contamination. The body had already undergone embalming before the final autopsy, compromising biological evidence. Despite the uncertainty, one recurring issue remained unresolved. At least one guest left the hotel early that morning and did not respond to initial police inquiries. His departure was not logged through the official checkout process, and hotel security failed to identify his exact time of exit. Investigators viewed this as a potential evasion. While his connection to Christine was still unclear, his unexplained absence introduced a variable that could not be ignored. The party, once meant to welcome a new year, had now become central to a criminal inquiry. The sequence of conversations, casual toasts, and quiet disappearances painted a fragmented picture. Authorities now had to ask not only what happened inside that hotel room, but who, if anyone, took advantage of the silence that followed. Because within that silence, the first clues had already begun to speak. Part 3. The Circle of Lies. When the autopsy report was submitted to the Makati City Police Department, the results raised more questions than they answered. Christine Angelica Dacera had multiple bruises across her arms, legs, and thighs. Minor abrasions were documented on her knees and her inner thigh. A tear was observed in the area of the hymen. The pathologist noted early signs of internal hemorrhaging. However, the official cause of death was recorded as a ruptured aortic aneurysm. This finding, while medically plausible, failed to satisfy investigators. They argued that the physical trauma could not be dismissed so easily. The presence of ecchymosis, specifically in sensitive regions of the body, suggested to them that external force may have been applied. The bruises were of varying age and intensity, which complicated the timeline. Some appeared fresh, others had already begun to discolor. Forensic experts were brought in to assist with advanced tissue analysis. Their role was to determine whether the injuries were sustained before or after death. In trauma investigations, this distinction is essential. Post-mortem bruising does not involve bleeding beneath the skin. In contrast, pre-mortem bruising reflects circulatory activity and oxygenation. Preliminary findings indicated that several of Christine's injuries occurred while her heart was still beating. Simultaneously, the Philippine National Police Crime Laboratory began analyzing fluid samples collected during the examination. The initial report stated that seminal fluid had been detected. No clarification was given as to the quantity, the location, or the origin of the DNA. The samples had already been compromised due to embalming procedures performed before the second autopsy. Investigators acknowledged this oversight, but insisted the findings still held value. Efforts were made to match the biological material to the 11 men present during the party. Each individual provided a buccal swab. However, the results were inconclusive. No single profile matched definitively. Analysts noted possible contamination or degradation of the sample, citing poor preservation and chemical interference from the embalming fluids. Without viable DNA, the prosecution lost its strongest form of physical evidence. Attention then shifted to the sequence of statements made by those involved. Under the direction of the National Bureau of Investigation, each of the 11 attendees was called in for individual questioning. The goal was to identify inconsistencies, detect rehearsed language, and isolate any anomalies that might suggest deception. The initial claims were remarkably synchronized. Each of the men emphasized that they were friends or acquaintances of Christine. All confirmed that she consumed alcohol. Many recalled her being heavily intoxicated, but did not identify any moment of visible medical distress. More notably, 10 out of 11 participants stated they believed Christine died of natural causes. When asked to recount the hours between 3 a.m. and 10 a.m., several responses contradicted surveillance records. One man stated he left at 4:30 a.m., yet camera footage showed him re-entering room 2207 at 5:20 a.m. Another claimed to have slept through the night, but swipe card logs revealed multiple entries and exits from both rooms. These irregularities raised the possibility that a coordinated narrative had been agreed upon prior to questioning. As the investigation unfolded, public focus turned to a detail repeated by nearly all witnesses. Each one mentioned, unprompted, that they identified as homosexual. This consistent assertion became a point of interest for behavioral analysts. While not inherently suspicious, the uniformity and timing of this disclosure suggested a defensive strategy. It appeared designed to preempt any assumption of sexual misconduct. Investigators cross-referenced these claims with social media activity and known personal relationships. Most of the individuals had a documented history of engaging in same-sex relationships. However, one man, identified as Gregorio Angelo Raphael, had no visible digital footprint confirming his orientation. He had limited public interaction, no tagged photos, and a minimal presence online. Despite repeated requests, he declined to provide further context about his private life. Attention eventually returned to a set of messages sent from Christine's phone during the early hours of the 1st of January. At 3:17 a.m., she sent a message to a friend not present at the party. The content was brief and cryptic. It read, "I'm not safe." The recipient never responded. That message, preserved in the phone's SMS log, became the most direct suggestion that Christine may have felt threatened. The message timestamp aligned with a lull in camera activity between rooms 2209 and 2207. For almost 90 minutes, there were no recorded movements, no door entries, and no hall activity. This period, later labeled by investigators as the blackout window, marked the final phase in Christine's known timeline. No eyewitness accounted for her actions during that time. No one claimed to have seen her alive after 4 a.m. Despite being in a room surrounded by others, her final moments remained unobserved. The lack of conclusive biological evidence did not stop the investigation. Analysts re-examined the psychological profile of each suspect. One man, who had previously volunteered information during initial questioning, later retracted key parts of his statement. He cited confusion due to alcohol and fatigue. However, behavioral patterns suggested possible deliberate omission. Investigators considered whether he had withheld information to protect someone else. The path to the truth was becoming obscured, not only by insufficient data, but by inconsistencies in behavior. A circle had formed, each man pointing outward, none inward. The truth, if it existed among them, had been buried beneath mutual denial and crafted recollection. And in that circle, the lines between loyalty and silence had already begun to blur. Part 4. Dead silence. In the days following the autopsy, attention shifted from the medical findings to the digital evidence. Surveillance footage from the City Garden Grand Hotel offered a clearer timeline of the final hours, but it also exposed contradictions within the narrative that had been presented. At 2:50 a.m., Christine Angelica Dacera was seen holding hands with a man outside room 2209. Her face showed signs of intoxication, but also comfort. 2 minutes later, both returned to the hallway. The man, later identified as John Pascual de la Serna, appeared reluctant to engage physically, yet Christine attempted to kiss him as he rang the doorbell. His body language indicated discomfort. At 4:13 a.m., she was visibly unstable and was carried by another individual toward the same room. At 6:23 a.m., Christine was seen again on the hallway camera. Her body appeared limp. She was supported by a different man, Gregorio Angelo Raphael. The footage captured her feet dragging behind her with minimal resistance. Moments later, the door to room 2209 closed behind them. She would not be seen alive after that point. Investigators focused on the behavior of those present during this window. The occupants of the room maintained that Christine was asleep and later presumed unconscious due to excessive alcohol intake. Yet none attempted to wake her, monitor her condition, or contact emergency services until several hours had passed. One critical detail emerged during phone record analysis. At 3:17 a.m., Christine had sent a message to her mother. The content read, "Happy New Year, Mom. Love you." A minute later, she attempted a voice call, which was unanswered. This interaction occurred after she had already shown clear signs of physical impairment. For investigators, this suggested that she still had the capacity for basic coordination and communication at that point. The rapid decline that followed was therefore not expected. An additional call was placed at 3:45 a.m. to a separate contact. It rang but was not picked up. Based on cell tower triangulation, the call was made from inside the hotel suite. This suggested that Christine had not yet been moved to the bathtub and was possibly still mobile or semi-conscious. If the incident were to be interpreted as a medical emergency, the inaction that followed becomes essential to understanding the nature of the event. Christine had visible difficulty maintaining consciousness. Several individuals acknowledged her condition, yet no one attempted to call for medical help until nearly noon. In legal terms, this delay could constitute negligence. In behavioral terms, it demonstrated detachment from the severity of her symptoms. Alternatively, if foul play were to be considered, the silence and uniformity of witness statements could indicate post-incident coordination. Each participant expressed surprise at her death. Each denied knowledge of any trauma. Yet bruises and abrasions were evident. Her body showed signs of pre-mortem impact. The superficial tear, the internal hemorrhaging, and the delayed response were not easily dismissed as coincidental. Experts proposed two primary theories. The first involved accidental death due to pre-existing cardiovascular conditions, possibly worsened by alcohol, fatigue, and emotional stress. The ruptured aorta would be consistent with elevated blood pressure. The lack of narcotics in her system supported this explanation. Minor injuries could be attributed to unintentional contact during intoxication or movement. The second theory considered the possibility of intentional harm. The abrasions near the genitals, bruising along the wrists and thighs, and signs of internal pressure created grounds for suspicion. The inconsistencies in timing, the unexplained absence of one attendee during a critical window, and the coordinated nature of responses suggested the potential for collusion or concealment. In both scenarios, the absence of immediate intervention remained a focal point. Experts in forensic psychology reviewed the interviews and concluded that some individuals exhibited signs of cognitive dissonance, a psychological response common in group incidents involving guilt or shared responsibility. Those in proximity to Christine may have rationalized her symptoms as intoxication, minimizing the risk and absolving themselves of the need to act. Others may have recognized the severity and chosen silence. When questioned about their awareness of Christine's final condition, most responses followed a similar format. She was tired. She wanted to lie down. She was breathing normally. These observations were repeated across multiple statements, almost verbatim. Investigators noted that the repetition suggested either shared memory or mutual influence. In the absence of definitive biological evidence, the inquiry turned to motive. None of the men present had a known history of violence. None stood to benefit from Christine's death. There was no documented argument, no signs of forced entry or physical struggle. Yet there remained a gap between what was reported and what had clearly taken place. Medical experts concluded that Christine had died of a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The exact trigger could not be identified with certainty. There was insufficient evidence to support homicide, but the presence of unexplained injuries and behavioral irregularities made it impossible to rule out human involvement entirely. The silence that surrounded her death was not just physical, it was procedural, it was deliberate. And in that silence, the truth began to fracture, not from lack of facts, but from absence of responsibility. Part 5, Truth Buried Twice. The second autopsy was conducted under the supervision of the National Bureau of Investigation. It followed sustained public pressure and growing skepticism over the accuracy of the initial findings. The body had already undergone embalming, which limited the integrity of biological evidence. However, the pathology team focused on anatomical consistency, internal organ weight, and circulatory patterns. The heart was measured at 500 grams. This was significantly above the average for a woman of Christine Angelica Dacera's age and body type. Aortic rupture remained the final conclusion. No internal hemorrhage consistent with direct assault was found in the pelvic region. Signs of systemic hypertension were present. Microscopic examination showed vascular thinning near the origin of the aortic arch. These medical indicators supported the hypothesis of a spontaneous aneurysmal rupture, likely aggravated by elevated blood pressure. Ethanol detected in her bloodstream was confirmed at levels capable of impairing coordination and neurological function. No traces of recreational drugs or sedatives were found. These results contradicted the assumptions made by the initial police report, which had labeled the case as a rape-homicide based on superficial injuries and preliminary toxicology. The early classification had been issued before laboratory confirmations were complete. Statements from law enforcement officials at the time were later reviewed and determined to be procedurally premature. The Department of Justice issued an internal audit of the Makati police handling of the case. Multiple violations were identified, including failure to secure the scene prior to embalming, improper evidence, chain of custody, and premature media disclosure. The officer in charge of the original investigation, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Depositar, was removed from the case. His public statements had included categorical accusations before forensic processes had been finalized. The first forensic examiner, Michael Sarmiento, also received disciplinary review. His reporting failed to qualify the bruising patterns with respect to decomposition stages and pressure-related discoloration. He had documented perineal laceration without specifying the age or forensic relevance of the injury. His phrasing was later deemed insufficiently supported by histological data. In a separate ruling, the Philippine National Police acknowledged procedural lapses. The admission included the possibility that evidence interpretation had been influenced by media and political pressure. The decision to file charges against the 11 male attendees had been based on circumstantial signs, none of which had met the evidentiary threshold for prosecution. The Department of Health later released a joint statement with forensic consultants clarifying that spontaneous rupture of the aorta is rare in young adults but not impossible. Congenital defects, hormonal fluctuations, and acute physiological stress are documented precursors. Physical trauma is not a necessary condition. Public discourse around Christine's case evolved rapidly. Online platforms amplified polarizing views. One narrative portrayed her as a reckless partygoer, responsible for her own demise. Another cast her as an innocent victim, failed by her peers and abandoned in a moment of vulnerability. Both views lacked foundation in verified data. Behavioral analysts emphasized a more grounded conclusion. Christine was exposed to alcohol, sleep deprivation, and physical exertion in a compressed window of time. She exhibited symptoms of cardiovascular distress. No definitive act of violence was observed on surveillance. No conclusive trace of assault-related DNA was identified. Her death was not the product of a single decision, but a sequence of omissions. The group environment lacked medical awareness. Responsibility was diffused. Awareness was delayed. This pattern is consistent with bystander phenomena in closed social systems, where no participant assumes accountability despite visible deterioration. Legal charges were dropped. The individuals originally named as suspects pursued legal action for defamation and reputational harm. Christine's family contested the rulings. The final report cited natural causes as the official reason for death. No further indictments were filed. In the months that followed, focus shifted from forensic analysis to institutional accountability. Procedural gaps in police conduct were acknowledged. The case became a reference point in discussions on ethical evidence handling and media responsibility. It also exposed the dangers of premature accusation, especially in high-profile cases involving young women. Christine Dacera became a subject of national debate, not for what she did, but for how her death was interpreted. Her identity was reshaped by speculation. The absence of proof did not prevent the formation of public judgment. Her final hours were dissected by strangers, and her memory distorted by narratives constructed without verification. The case did not reveal a hidden killer. It revealed a structural failure. The investigation did not uncover a conspiracy. It uncovered a lack of control. And the silence that followed was not just forensic, it was social. Christine Dacera was buried once by the weight of circumstance, then again by the weight of opinion. If justice is measured not by punishment but by understanding, then her case remains unfinished in the public mind. How do societies protect victims when the line between witness and participant remains invisible? And how should guilt be defined when the cause of death is biological but responsibility is shared?